My ultimate destination was Adoa, the capital of Tigray, and seat of the Abyssinian mission conducted by my friends Eisenberg and Blumhardt. Reaching Malta from Marseille, I embarked in an Austrian sailing vessel for Alexandria, and when off Candia a storm arose of greater violence than our captain declared he had experienced for 40 years. Unaccustomed as I was to the sea, I consoled myself with the thought that the greatest of all missionaries, the Apostle Paul, had been exposed to similar peril in those waters and had been preserved by the mercy of God. I cast myself on his protecting power with childlike and trusting prayer, which so strengthened me that I was enabled to sustain my terrified fellow voyagers, among whom was a French actress, greatly by reading aloud the narrative of the prophet Jonah, and of the disciples of our Lord when they were in danger on the Sea of Galilee. The impression produced by the word of God in the hour of need on one of my fellow voyagers was first made known to me 13 years afterwards. When I was residing in London in 1850 after my first return from Africa, a gentleman one day entered my room and addressing me, said, "Do you remember that storm on our way to Alexandria, and your reading out of the Word of God to your fellow voyagers?" I answered in the affirmative, and the stranger, who had been a doctor of laws at Malta, then told me that after his return from Egypt he had procured a Bible, and feeling the power of the gospel on his heart, he had been impelled to hold prayer meetings in Malta, which had brought upon him persecution at the hands of the Romish priests, and forced him to leave that island, from whence he had come to England. Proceeding from Alexandria to Cairo, I was hospitably received at the latter place by the missionaries' crews and leader, with whom I remained until September, preparing for my Abyssinian journey chiefly by the study of colloquial Arabic, in which I made such progress during those few months that in the autumn I was able to continue my journey to Habash without an interpreter. What most gratified me even among the many sights in Egypt, was the flourishing missionary school at Cairo in which many Coptic, Armenian, and Mohammedan children were receiving instruction. From Cairo to Suez there was in those days neither road, public conveyance, nor railway, and I traveled Arab fashion on a camel. Striking, too, is the contrast between the Suez of 15 years later with those days when steam communication with Bombay was yet in its infancy. No navigable river flows into the Red Sea, which is full of sunken rocks and sandbanks that are increasing through the growth of coral reefs. The navigation is difficult and dangerous, and of the many harbors but few are safe, so that in most cases ships of large burden must anchor far out at sea. I do not think, therefore, that the Red Sea will attain more importance, even through the much talked of canal across the Isthmus of Suez. In my opinion, the great advantage to be derived from the success of this scheme will not be so much in the acquisitions which commerce may derive from the Red Sea and the countries on its shores, as in the extension of European polity and civilization to Arabia, Abyssinia, and the whole of South, Eastern Africa. It will weaken Mohammedanism in the land of its birth, Arabia, and on the African coast, tend to suppress the Arabian slave trade, and subjugate East African heathenism by Christianity and its civilization, and finally, open up immense and noble regions in southern Abyssinia and among the Gallas to thousands of European emigrants when America, Australia, and Tasmania cease to attract them. From Suez I sailed in an Arabian vessel to Jeddah, one of the most flourishing ports of the Red Sea, with large, lofty and solid houses, and many rich inhabitants, which since the English occupation of Aden, has thriven by the Arabian and Indian trade, while Mocha has declined. I was at first much struck by the Arabian practice of halting on the voyage during the night, and laying to in some haven or anchoring place, but was soon convinced of the necessity of the step, which is caused partly by the many rocks in the Red Sea, partly and chiefly by the unskillfulness of the Arab sailors, which is, indeed, so great, that it is always hazardous to trust one's self in an Arabian vessel. I have had good reason to note that fact in my many voyages during 18 years on both shores of the Red Sea, as well as on the south coast of Arabia, and on the east shores of Africa, as far as the 10th degree of southern latitude, for often have I been in danger of shipwreck and destruction. On the other hand, the Arabian mode of voyaging has, it must be confessed, its advantages, the chief of which is that the traveler can continually visit and become acquainted with new regions. Reaching Jeddah in 22 days, I embarked thence for Massawa, an island and chief seaport of the Abyssinian coast, where I arrived in December, 1837. Before prosecuting my journey into Abyssinia I had, according to the usual custom, to repair to Harkiko or Dohono, the chief place of the Mohammedan shohos of the mainland, whose name required the propitiation of a present before leave was granted to traverse his dominions. The Naib is appointed by the governor of Massawa and rules the nomadic and pastoral shohos, nominally as the representative of the port. A bargain was struck and I received an escort of 4 soldiers to conduct me through the shoho country to the foot of the mountain Shumfido. At first all went well, but when the camels which had carried my baggage had set out on their return to Harkiko I was obliged to hire 31 oxen from the shohos of the mountain to transport my effects over the Shumfido, 6,000 feet in height. Then began the tumult which was to initiate me into the mysteries of African travel. The savage shohos demanded a much larger than the stipulated sum, and when I refused to pay it they withdrew with the chiefs to their mountains, reckoning on my helpless plight. On the 3rd day a terrible war shout was heard from the heights, and the shohos, descending in great numbers, ranged themselves in battle array 100 paces in front of our tents. I was rather alarmed, and the soldiers of the Naib showed the white feather, and asked for powder and ball. A couple of shots in the air kept the enemy from approaching nearer our extempore fortifications of piled-up chests, behind which we calmly awaited their onslaught. At the moment of the greatest danger, however, there suddenly appeared upon the scene a Württemberg officer, Herr Kielmayer, with 60 Abyssinians sent by my dear fellow, laborer, missionary Eisenberg, to meet me at the foot of the Shumfido, and to bring my baggage to Adoa. Having struck a bargain with the shohos, at length we reached Halai, the first Christian village on the Abyssinian frontier. The entry into Abyssinia had a singular effect on me. The bracing air which I was breathing on a height 6,000 feet above the sea, the noble prospect eastward and westward, the consciousness of being again in a country, Christian, it may be only in name, the thought that I should soon be at the end of my long and toilsome journey, and reach the place in which I was to labor for the kingdom of God, all combined to raise my spirits in an extraordinary degree. On the way from Halai, indeed, all was not smooth, obstructions being thrown in our path by the enemies of the Protestant mission at Adoa, who were annoyed by the arrival of another Protestant missionary. But I escaped these troubles in some measure by having hastened forward in advance of my party to greet as soon as possible my fellow laborers, Eisenberg and Blumhardt. Soon after my arrival in Adoa I accompanied my friends Eisenberg and Blumhardt to pay a visit to Ubaya, the Prince of Tigra, who received me very kindly, and gave me promises of protection, which were not kept. The priests and chief men of Tigra disliked the Protestant mission, partly from bigotry, partly from unsatisfied greed. Before my arrival, Eisenberg, the senior of the mission, had begun to build a new house which he thought necessary. In digging for the foundation and for building materials a deep excavation was made, and the enemies of the mission asserted that we were making a subterranean passage, through which English soldiers and guns were to be brought for the conquest of Abyssinia. But the ultimate cause of our expulsion was the arrival of 2 Frenchmen, the brothers Diabadi, accompanied by 2 Roman Catholic priests. The hostility of the latter strengthened the hands of the chief priest of Adoa, who requested from Eubaea the expulsion of the Protestant missionaries, and the retention of the Roman Catholics, these having asserted that they were of the same family of Christians as the Abyssinians themselves. We might have remained had we chosen to offer the prince a present greater than that which he had received from the Roman Catholics, but such a course we deemed an unworthy one, and after a residence of scarcely 2 months, I had to quit the land in which I would so willingly have striven to spread the gospel. Many of the Bibles which I had brought to Adoa were destroyed by the Abyssinian priests, undoubtedly at the instigation of the Roman Catholics, but many which had been distributed among the other provinces of Abyssinia, it was out of their power to destroy. The new mission house remained unfinished, and gradually into decay, but its habitable portion was taken possession of by the Alaka, or chief priest, who had long regarded it with a covetous eye. It was in the March of 1838 that we quitted Adoa, reaching Massawa in safety. There we took counsel as to our future movements, and Eisenberg and Blumhardt resolved on returning to Cairo to await the decision of the committee in London. I determined on penetrating to the Christian kingdom of Shoa, whose friendly ruler, Haile Selassie, had formerly sent a messenger to Eisenberg inviting him to visit his dominions. My original intention was to journey from Zila, a town on the Somali coast, to Shoa, but circumstances led me to modify my plan. Proceeding with my friends to Jeddah, I sailed thence in a Persian ship to Mocha. On board this Persian vessel I had ample opportunities of studying the mode in which the Mohammedans force on their new slaves the religion of their prophet. A sheikh kept showing some gala boys the bowings and genuflections of Mohammedan prayer, and, in fact, the whole mechanism of his worship. When the poor slaves, who scarcely understood a word of Arabic, did not ape to his satisfaction the forms shown them, the sheikh broke out in abusive language, or boxed there at Mocha. I found that the proper landing place from which to penetrate to Shoa was Tajura on the Adal coast. Severe illness, however, compelled my return to Cairo, and it was not until the early spring of 1839 that I reached, in the company of my fellow laborer, Eisenberg. My new starting point, Tajora, or Tagora, which lies in a great plain on the shore of a beautiful bay stretching inward from the village itself, and separating the countries of the Somali and the Adal. Since Aden has been occupied by the English, the inhabitants have added a slight timber trade to their traffic with Arabia and Shoa. Till very lately, this was a place whence many slaves, especially Gallas and Christians from Gurig, were sold and shipped to Arabia. The old Sultan of Tajora, who, after consultation with his vizier, had given us permission to land, affected to be the king of all the Adal tribes, but his sovereignty was at the best of a mere nominal kind. The Adal call themselves in their own language, Offer, reminding us of the Hebrew Ophir. Adal is the Abyssinian name, and Danakil, the Arabic designation for the Offer nation. I was detained nearly 4 weeks at Tajora, negotiating the cost of transport with the natives. At last on the 27th of April 1839 we set forth, and I was about to become personally acquainted with the country which I had found so barren and empty in the map in my boyhood. As we penetrated the Adal desert we suffered much from heat and want of water, and saw few human beings or habitations. Besides gazelles and ostriches there were few wild animals, yet once we were disturbed by elephants, of which camels are dreadfully afraid. On the 29th of May we crossed the river Hawash and bivouacked in the open air on its woody bank, where there are many wild beasts. While we were all asleep, even the watchers, a hyena glided so near our resting places that we might have grasped it with our hands. It was in the morning we first noticed that it had been there by the footprints left in the sand, and we thanked God for his remarkable mercy. On the 31st of May we reached Dinomali on the frontier, where the customs officers and frontier governors inspected our luggage. A report was forthwith dispatched to the King of Shoa announcing that the two, gypsies, as Europeans are called in Abyssinia, had arrived. No foreigner is allowed either to enter or to quit Shoa without the permission of the king, so, until it came we remained in ferry at the foot of the mountain land. When the requisite permission had arrived we began to traverse the hill region of Shoa on the 2nd of June, and on the 3rd we ascended the lofty mountain on which lies the capital, Ankober. On the 7th of June we had an audience of the king, Haile Selassie, who gave us a very friendly reception, and to whom we explained the purely religious purpose of our mission, and on the 6th of July accompanied him by his own express desire to Angolala, the second capital of Shoa, which lies in the immediate neighborhood of the Galla tribes. He promised to give us in accordance with our request 6 boys to educate, but afterwards retracted his word, on the pretext that he did not need spiritual teachers so much as doctors, masons, smiths, and He was so fond of artisans that he often visited the workshops of the weavers, gun makers, and smiths, to watch their which had to be altered if not pleasing to him. In July we repaired by the king's command to Ankober, where we were to take up our abode. After we had long vainly entreated Haile Selassie for boys to educate, we determined to receive any one who should voluntarily offer himself. Several boys soon presented themselves, and amongst them one, Gebra Georges by name, who had capacity and took delight in learning. 2 read with him the Amharic Bible and instructed him besides in geography and history to his great delight. On the 12th of November Eisenberg left us with the intention of returning to Cairo and Europe, to prepare Amharic works for the press, and to superintend the printing of them in London. His departure made a very sad impression on me, then the only surviving missionary in Shoa. Shortly before his departure, M. Rachet arrived in Shoa and brought with him a powder mill and other valuable presents, which made his visit very acceptable to the king. Of this gentleman more hereafter. On the 13th of November the king returned from his campaign against the Gallas in Mugar mountain. He had found Christians and churches, severed by the Gallas in the lowlands from the church of Shoa. Christian remnants of the kind are to be met with here and there in the Galla countries. After the departure of Eisenberg I began to learn the Galla language in the hope of visiting as soon as possible a people so widely spread in Africa, and of founding a mission among them. As 9 the Romanist missionary said, "Give us China and Asia as ours, so may we say, give us the Gallas and Central Africa as ours." In translating the New Testament into the Galla language I made use of the Roman alphabet, which gave great displeasure to the Abyssinians, who would have preferred my selection of the Ethiopic. From the commencement of my residence in Shoa I made particular inquiries respecting everything connected with the Gallas, their religious notions, manners, and customs, their geographical extension, and and IAC accompanied the king on several military expeditions against the tribes in the south. The first campaign which I thus made in January and February 1840 led me into the territories of the tribes of the Abaju, Woberi, Gelan, Dembachu, Finfini, where there are hot springs with much sulfur in them, and of the Mulofalata, Medarabi, Wajidi, Meda and Kute, all Gallas. In the country of the last named tribe, M. Rachet and I who accompanied the expedition made inquiries of the king respecting the source of the river Hawash, asking whether he would not extend the expedition to that point. The king answered, that so far as he knew, there was between the Galla tribes Sado, Beko, Wareb, and Mecca, a boggy country in which the river takes its rise, but that his men would not on that occasion press so far forward. And, indeed, on the very same day the king gave orders for a return to Angolala by another route, so that Ratchet and I were deprived of the satisfaction of making an important discovery. In spite of this, in the book of travels which he afterwards published, Ratchet asserted that he had seen the sources of the Hawash, and that the king had sent an escort to accompany him thither. Both assertions are completely false. Alas! Such unconscientious statements are too common on the part of travelers, who huddle up a book and obtain honors and emoluments at the expense of geographical truth. Ratchet once said to me in the course of that expedition, Kraft, we must assert that we have seen the sources of the Hawash. When I replied that that would not be true, and that we had not seen them, he rejoined with a smile, "Oh, we must be philosophers." Our participation in these expeditions of the king, which lasted from 2 to 3 weeks, and thus did not cause me to be long absent from my school at Ankober, was useful in various ways, as I became more intimately acquainted with the southern Gallas, and formed a friendship with some of them, for instance, with the brave Chara, son of the queen of the tribe Mulofalata, and specially noted 3 places where a Gala mission might be founded: 1. On the mountain Yarer, on the road between Angolala and Gurig; a 2nd, among the tribe Mulofalata with Chami, the mother of Chara; and a 3rd, in Mugar in the vicinity of Debre Libanos not far from the Blue River. Beyond this, during these expeditions I became acquainted with high and low in Shoa and Ifat, and often large numbers of men touching the word of God and other edifying matters, besides obtaining great practice in the Amharic language, and being able to observe closely the ways of the Shoan population. Finally, my health was benefited, and the friendly demeanor of the king to me was manifested to all his subjects. Of course, my connection with the king's expeditions did not arise out of a hostile or martial spirit, but simply from a wish to become acquainted with regions partly unknown, and mainly to promulgate the gospel among the thousands of soldiers whom the king takes with him in these expeditions, which he is in the habit of undertaking in January, June, and October, to levy the tribute due by the Gallas, and to make further conquests. Widespread devastations follow the frequent refusals to pay the tribute by the Gala tribes, who are very foolish in provoking these calamities, as they might secure themselves by moderate payments in cattle and grain, were it not that their pride and passion for freedom lead to continual revolts and defeats. Pity that those beautiful countries are not turned to better account. The Gallas possess regions so fruitful, so rich in water and pasturage, and suitable both for tillage and for cattle, that Europeans can scarcely imagine their beauty. The climate, too, is as mild and healthy as that of Italy or Greece. The districts of Mulofalata, Ataburga, Meta, and Mecca, are particularly so, where, moreover, there are many and noble trees, among which the juniper deserves particular mention. In the May of 1840, I made a tour to Debre Libanos, the most sacred place of the Shoans, 4 days' journey to the northwest of Ankober. The greatest saint of Abyssinia, the famous Tekla Haymanot, is said to have lived there in the 12th century and to have raised up a miracle healing well by his prayers. In the neighborhood of Angolala I crossed the river Chacha, which flows from the province of Bulga and from Angolala in a deep glen towards the northwest, and which, near Kumdangai, in the province Shoa Meta, unites with the Barisa and some other rivers and forms the Atabai, flowing at last under the name of the Jama into the Blue River, the so-called Abai, or Abyssinian Nile. The Chacha, Atabai, and Jama form a natural dike against the incursions of the Gallas from the south, who, therefore, can never entirely subdue or even overrun the kingdom of Shoa, especially since King Sahala Selassie founded Angolala at a point where the Gallas might otherwise have been able to break in. On the road to Debre Libanos I also passed Sena Marcos, the second most holy locality of Shoa and which lies on a very steep rock, easily defensible. From this place you can overlook the whole north and west of Shoa. Before you ascend the mountain on which Debre Libanos lies, you must cross the river Segawatam, flesh and blood, in which the pilgrims bathe and purify themselves. I returned home towards the end of May, and devoted myself again to the instruction of my pupils, of whom there were 10 in the house, without reckoning the others who came and went irregularly. A scholar asked me for instruction in Hebrew, which many of the Abyssinian priests are fond of, as they fancy that they can discover deep secrets in the Hebrew words and names. I instructed chiefly in biblical, universal, and natural history, in geography and arithmetic, delivering to them in my household on Sundays a short disk. There came daily, too, many persons, priests and laymen, to whom I had thus an opportunity of proclaiming the gospel. At this time Haile Selassie conceived the notion of sending letters and presents to the East India Company, in order to bring about friendly relations with them. On the 6th of July 1840 he dispatched a messenger with letters to Aden to be delivered to the governor, Captain Haynes. A year elapsed, however, before the letters and presents were reciprocated by the mission of Major Harris, who, on the 15th of July 1841 arrived at Dinomali, on the frontier of Shoa, and with his suite and presents was received and treated by the Shones with a great deal of mistrust. It was mainly the bigoted priests and monks who tried to inspire the king with a distrust of foreigners. The priests were angry with me especially, because they thought that I had induced the king to allow the admission of the English and their presence, although it was the king's own decision to send a messenger to Aden, as he knew, among other things, that since the occupation of Aden the power of England was nearer to him than that of France, which M. Rothschild had lately represented in Shoa. I kept aloof from all political relations, and only when the king or Major Harry Nines asked for advice or aid did I express my opinions, for it was natural that I should be desired to act as interpreter for the English envoy, at least in important negotiations, as Major Harris and his suite did not understand Amharic. The king, too, had said to me from the very commencement, "You know the customs of my country and of your own, you must advise me in my dealings with Major Harris, that I may not offend him and Queen Victoria of England. If things go wrong, I shall hold you responsible." In this way, I was obliged often to express myself openly against the king, as well as against the English envoy, Major Harris, who, from the first, treated me in the most friendly manner, as, indeed, did all the members of the mission, Captain Graham, Drive, Kirk, Drive, Roth, Herr Bernitz, and C. Major Harris in his dealings with the king showed himself intent on accomplishing the object of his mission, which was by the establishment of a friendly connection between England and Shoa to pave the way for an increase of their commercial intercourse, for the due protection of travelers, and for the abolition of slavery, an object which, to say the truth, was attained only upon paper, but not in reality, by the signature of a treaty, or convention, consisting of 15 articles. The English envoy soon discovered that there were not in Shoa any important articles of commerce, and that consequently there could not be a profitable trade between it and Aden. The difficulties attending the transit of commodities through the Sandy Adal country were very evident, and the envoy soon gave up caring for the execution of the 15 articles, content to have them to show when he returned home, as a proof at least of the nominal success of the mission, and he openly avowed to me his conviction of all this, and that he should now look to his own interests, as little was to be gained for his government. And, in truth, the envoy acted in this spirit, endeavoring to gain the best possible acquaintance with the country and its inhabitants in order afterwards to be able to write a voluminous book on both. I myself was entreated by him to communicate every notice which my experience and knowledge could furnish, and willingly gratified this desire, and Major Harris interwove these communications into the text of his well-known work of 3 volumes, The Highlands of Ethiopia. I gave up much time and thought to the cause of the embassy, and wished for its prosperity and success, as likely to promote the spread of the gospel, as well as the prosperity of Shoa itself. To Shoa the connection with a Christian power could only exercise a wholesome influence, which from thence would be extended to the unknown countries of the south. I was convinced that there could be no permanence in the mission to the Gallas, Ingurig and Kambat, so long as Shoa was not connected with the coast. On that account, I wished heartily for the establishment of friendly relations between that country and England, and so far as I could with propriety I did my utmost to forward them. Haile Selassie seemed favorable to such relations, perhaps because he still remembered the dream of his father who had predicted that in the time of his son, Haile Selassie, red people, so the whites are called in Abyssinia when the term gypsy, that is, Egyptians, is not applied to them, would arrive and teach the Abyssinians all arts and knowledge. Now, since 1836, Europeans, Combes and Tamasir, Martin, Dufy, Eisenberg, and myself, Rochet, Airston, Dr. Beek, and finally, the English envoy had rapidly followed each other, and Haile Selassie was naturally led to see in this the fulfillment of the dream, and being, to a certain extent, enlightened and eager for improvement, he could not but feel it desirable to form a connection with such a nation as the English, of whom he had heard so much from the Donaquil. It is only a pity that the connection established was not a closer one, and more productive of blessings to Africa. Yet it has had the effect of making this and the neighboring regions better known to geographers at least. This knowledge will bear fruit in the future when Shoa shall have a wiser ruler than Haile Selassie. He had, indeed, great good nature, delighted in improvement, and possessed a sense of justice, and many good qualities, but he was too much led away by the superstition of the priests, the narrow prejudices of his chiefs, the desire for personal enrichment, and the oriental habit of accumulating dead tray. Had he rightly understood and employed the opportunity which was afforded him of establishing a connection with England, he might have become sovereign not only of Abyssinia, but of the whole of Inner Africa. But such is man. In his ignorance, he casts away the greatest treasures for this world and the next treasures, which, if he knew how to use them, would secure him temporal no less than his eternal well-being. Shoa, in its widest sense, includes the whole of the Ethiopian highlands, which are bounded on the east by the Adal Desert, on the south by the Hawash, on the west by the Abai Blue River, and on the north by the tribes of the Mohammedan Gallas. In a more limited sense, it comprises the western portion of those highlands, which eastward in the direction of the Adal Desert has received the name of Ifat. This eastern section of the mountain land comprises the provinces Bulga, Fatagar, Menchar in the south, Argaba in the east, and Gedam and Ephra in the north. Argaba includes the lowlands, which spread themselves out towards the Adal Desert, and are inhabited by Mohammedans, partly under Shoan rule, partly as in the north, under that of the Wolo Gallas. Shoa, or the Western High. lands in its narrower sense, comprises the provinces and districts of Tegulet, Shoa Meda, Morabiti, Mons and Gesha. It seems that this division into Shoa and Ifat takes its rise from the mountain chain which stretches from Fatagar through Bulga to Ankober and as far as Gesha, and then still further into the interior of Abyssinia. Both these sections of the country are tolerably populous, a circumstance which is aided by the fertility of the soil, the excellence of the climate, and the external tranquility of the country, which for a long time has seen no enemy within its boundaries. The population of the kingdom of Shoa may be estimated at upwards of 1 million if the subjugated Gallas of the south are included. In extent from west to east, from the Adal Desert to the Blue River, it is nearly 2 degrees, and about the same length from south to north, from the river Hawash to the fortress Dare. The country is rich in springs, brooks, and rivers, and lakes are not wanting. There are none of the nobler metals in abundance, but in one locality in the vicinity of Debra Burhan the existence of a gold field is suspected. There is plenty of iron, sulfur, and pit coal, the latter being chiefly found in the eastern part of Shoa, but the inhabitants have not yet learned to turn it to account. The form of government in Shoa is an absolute monarchy. The king is the only lord and master of the country, to whom belong the bodies, lives, and possessions of his subjects. He has no standing army, but only a few hundred bodyguards, armed with muskets. When war breaks out, every district governor must supply a contingent. The whole army may muster from 30,000 to 50,000 men, of whom about 1,000 are armed with muskets, the rest being equipped with spears, shields, and swords. The soldiers are mostly cavalry, mounted on horses or mules. Art and science are still in a state of infancy in Shoa. The mass of the population is Christian after the form of the Coptic Church in Egypt, on which, as is well known, the Abyssinian Church is dependent. In the east, however, there are many Mohammedans, and in the south, tribes of heathen Gallas, subject to the ruler of Shoa. In ecclesiastical constitution Shoa, as also Abyssinia in general, is episcopal. The Coptic Patriarch in Egypt has been since about AD 1280 in the habit of nominating the chief bishop of Abyssinia, who is styled Abuna, our father. This prelate ordains all priests and deacons. He also consecrates the king and church by the aid of the Ekage, the supreme head of the monks, who are very numerous and influential. Those who wish to be ordained must be able to read and to repeat the Nicene Creed, whereupon the Abuna breathes on the candidate, laying on hands blesses him, and bestows on him the sign of the cross, receiving then 2 pieces of salt as ordination fees. After ordination deacons and priests cannot marry, but must not part with the wives whom they may have married before ordination. The duties of the southern countries of Abyssinia, with a brief description of the Gallas, a nation to which during my residence in Shoa I paid particular attention, as I consider them destined by Providence after their conversion to Christianity to attain the importance and fulfill the mission which heaven has pointed out to the Germans in Europe. In the course of time the Gallas have taken possession of a large section of eastern Africa. Separated into many tribes independent of each other they extend, so to say, from the 8th degree of north to the 3rd degree of south latitude, numbering, in the whole, from 6 to 8 millions, an amount of which scarcely any other African race can boast. When in the 16th century Muhammad Graga overran and destroyed the land, coming from the south with their innumerable horsemen, the Gallas seized on some of the finest portions of Abyssinia. This movement may have been part of a more general one in the center of Africa, which drove the tribes of the interior towards the coast, the Gallas migrating towards the north and east, and it would seem to have been providentially ordained by this migration of the Gallas to oppose a barrier to the onward rush of the Mohammedans from Arabia, and so at one and the same time to punish the abominable heresies of Christian Abyssinia, and the wild fanaticism of the Mohammedans. Had not Providence brought the Portuguese by sea to the eastern coast in the 15th century, and afterwards impelled the Gallas forward from the interior, the fiery and proselytizing Islams would probably have overrun equatorial Africa from east to west, as they once threatened to overrun Europe. The name, Gallas, in their own language means immigrants, and has been given them by the Arabs and Abyssinians. They call themselves Orma, or Oroma, strong, or brave men, and their language they call Avan Orma, the mouth of the Ormas, so as the Gallas have no general name to indicate their nationality or its seat, I propose to include both under the designation of Ormania. I have heard several very different accounts given of the origin of the Gallas, or, as I would call them, the Ormas, but, whatever it may have been, it is certain that on their first appearance in Abyssinia they were a very wild and warlike people, who united under one head might have conquered not only Abyssinia, but the whole of Africa. After having occupied, however, the finest provinces of Abyssinia, they began to make war upon each other, which checked their further progress, and made it easy for the Abyssinians to subjugate one tribe after another. With their horsemen, notwithstanding their numbers, the Gallas found it difficult to conquer the mountainous highlands of Abyssinia. In general, the Gallas have a manly appearance, are large and powerfully built, but with savage featurish, made still more savage-looking and fierce by their long hair, worn like a mane over the shoulders. They are principally of a dark brown color, by which, no less than by intellectual capacity and teachableness, they are so advantageously distinguished from all other East Africans, that the Gallas slaves, especially the young women, are much sought after by the slave dealers, and in Arabia fetch from $100 to $150 each. Their bodies, and long upper garment in form like the Roman toga, are besmeared with a thick crust of butter, giving an unpleasant odor, which strangers scent from afar. The women wear a short gown of leather fastened round their loins by a girdle, on the skirt of which a number of pieces of coral are hung by way of ornament. The more wealthy wear also a large upper garment over this gown, which gives them the appearance of European women. The weapons of the Gallas are a spear, sword, and shield, and they all ride on horseback. Even the women gallop beside or behind their husbands, for among them it is considered degrading to go on foot. The Galla horses are very small, but beautiful in color, and extremely swift, though horseshoes are unknown. The Gallas in the neighborhood of Abyssinia are tillers of the soil as well as breeders of cattle, while their brethren under the equator are merely pastoral and lead a nomadic life. Those of the equator, moreover, have no horses and are altogether far behind the others, presenting the genuine type of the original Gallas, especially in their religious notions. Where the Gallas follow agriculture, the men plow, sow, and reap, while the women look after the oxen, cows, horses, sheep, and goats, and take care of the house and its concerns. Rye, wheat, barley and Indian corn, grow in such great abundance in the Galla countries, that for $1 you may buy almost more barley or rye than a camel can manage to carry. The climate of most of these countries is remarkably beautiful and healthy, the average temperature being 56°. Fahrenheit, the highest 70°, and the lowest, 46°. The Gallas occupy vast and noble plains which are verdant almost all the year round, and afford nourishment to immense herds of cattle. Their houses or huts are round and cone-shaped, covered with roofs of grass and mostly enclosed by a low stone wall for security against sudden attack. The villages or hamlets are for the most part in groves or woods, on heights, or on the sides of mountains and rivers. The land is rich in springs and brooks, well